there are a lot of writers and a lot of artists that have taken a much darker, more pessimistic view of the society, the deteriorating quality of individual existence and so forth. I think most people, even very young people, have come to a realization our way of existing imperils a great many important values. We are a self-consuming kind of social order. We are depleting resources we don't even have a name for in our values and culture and education, so forth. We're depleting these things, and which is to say we're not replenishing them the way a healthy society would do. We're creating a staler and staler atmosphere for subsequent generations to grow up in. To say that is just to say, well, that's the inevitable result of an educational system whose culture has become too narrow, too one-sided. We're producing a kind of dystopian society in which the range of intelligent choice has just been viciously reduced. People don't see the world with the full spectrum of values and ideas that were there. I think were there 30 or 40 years ago, and even that was, not any kind of paradise.
Yeah, right.
Our culture has never been as exploratory and experimental and freewheeling as we might want to imagine that it has, because we think of it as the culture of a free society. How can a society be a free society and not have a far more open-minded and inquiring kind of attitude, toward those larger issues? How my different interests came together on this point was through trying to produce those fables. If you imagine, in some sense, that reptiles have a certain sort of personality syndrome to them, and fish, and insects, and so forth, what kind of civilization would you project out of each one of those species? In part it's comical, in part it's a serious issue, because it asks you to think about the relationship between social order and character type, even though the character that you're talking about is really a caricature of some kind. So I found myself first starting to stretch my own narrow academic background as I tried to raise these more organic questions. Trying to get some way of understanding or digesting what the whole system of life, society, what does that consist in as a kind of self-contained universe. Each people that has ever created an organized civilization sees itself as the one and only way to be. In antiquity, the ancient Greeks thought they saw the world of nature as it was, as it had to be. When Christianity came along with its radically counter-natural ways of thinking about personality, religion, etc., the Greeks thought this was absurdity. It did not make sense in terms of the natural world as the Greeks took it for granted. Christianity came and created a civilization of its own that called itself Catholic, as universal, all-embracing, which is what Catholic means.
Sure.
And modern science came and challenged that worldview in such a way that the unthinkable, what was unthinkable for one civilization became the only thing that was thinkable for the next one. In our histories of civilization, I think we do not pay any sufficient attention to the animosity between one form of civilization and another. There's no question but that civilization, Christianity had a ferocious antagonism toward that ancient world that it tried to free itself from and really hoped to spell the downfall of. And modern science arose with complete antagonism toward Christianity. We haven't come to terms with these issues. these are such controversial matters, we don't know how to look them in the face. To the greatest extent, we produce people who have been as narrowly indoctrinated into the modern scientific worldview as medieval Christianity produced people who are narrowly indoctrinated into the Catholic worldview. It's our dogmatism.
Yeah.
You know, if we were really a universal civilization, if we really thought about these issues in their full scale and range of significance, we would think back in what I call the philosophy of civilization or philosophy of history. We would try to have a viewpoint that was more cosmic. We would try to understand the Greeks, the medievals, the moderns. These things make up a certain kind of evolution. The kind of existence we have today became what it is. It grew out of forces and structures that were analogous but never exactly the same. So the issue that I think American philosophy especially has not risen to is how to escape the envelope of our own contemporaneous ways of thinking and seeing things, and understanding that what we are, we're not the be-all and end-all of anything. We are a certain a train stop in the history of the world. We are something that's in transit from taking one form, taking another form. If we understood ourselves in that dynamic way, we would understand no society can remain what it is. It either evolves into something else, which is intelligently aimed at and competent and sane, or it goes into decay, into entropy. A society without a sense of vision of what's healthy for human beings and what's really valuable. So a society that doesn't have that kind of philosophical or spiritual or moral or cultural worldview, it's going to be the victim of a process of entropy. I mean, it's becoming what it becomes by default because it doesn't have an active and intelligent, energetic program of what it ought to be, a conscientious sense of what would fulfill human beings. So these are issues. I mean, I tried posing a lot of these things from time to time in the Comics Journal column.
Yeah.
And that it's funny in a way because it got very poor response, I think, from the readers of the Comics Journal in general. Americans are not, Americans are just not viscerally competent at philosophizing. We don't think conceptually. Our educational system, doesn't encourage us to develop the kinds of resources that have to fall into place for those things to get, well focused, well framed, well digested. I did the column as something that I felt, and the publisher, Gary Groth, felt desperately needed to be done. Back in the 50s and 60s, you could find popularly accessible essayists, people who tried to treat the larger issues of the times in some way in the popular media. We've been tossed into blackness here. We both felt that there was a kind of massive challenge that society was put through in the 50s and 60s, how to come to terms with the basic philosophical and political issues of the age. And these issues just aren't even getting raised. I mean, our current crop of popular publications have become so specialized. Everywhere you look on a magazine rack, you find overwhelmingly, entire special interest zones of motorcycling and mountain climbing and so on and so forth. Very little that tries to stimulate some quality of intelligence.
Would like this to go up here right now?
So our purpose was to throw a little more meat into the stew of what readers were getting from the Comics Journal. It's one thing to get wrapped up in the particulars of what's going on in comics and the particular fashions and currents of change and so forth. It's something else to see those issues cast against the background of what's going on in the larger culture, and what is, this thing we laughably call a civilization. I still feel that work needs to be done, and I still believe a good, solid, some kind of digestive function needs to go on that has just it's ceased between high culture and low culture. There ought to be some kind of metabolism. Our various publications have tended to regurgitate the same kinds of stuff over and over, and no one seems to come along and challenge the whole framework of what's taken for granted. So that was the audacious task that we felt it's high time someone did it, and it's the kind of thing we would like to read.
Sure.
If it existed. So why not do it?
Sure. Well, inspired me. I didn't even read all of them either.
Yeah.
But I got a lot of them.
Great.
How do you make that distinction between high and low culture? I'm curious.
Well, low culture is
just whatever you like.
There are several ways of trying to make sense of it. In practical terms, I think you could say low culture is the culture as it has been digested into the lives of most people who have basically practical or economic or personal lives. People are not very theoretical, not very intellectual. High culture, by contrast, is what is supposed to be generated by the intellectuals or the thinkers or the creative persons. So, in effect, you get two different kinds of culture, one for people who are merely consumers, and the other for people who are supposedly more active, more creative or constructive or productive. Now, in our particular society, I think those distinctions really don't hold true very well. For one thing, we have co-opted or subverted our intellectuals. It's very, very hard for individuals who want to live the life of ideas to survive out in the society at large. And the consequence of that is they tend to get absorbed into the university, and the university breaks down their way of thinking, their way of seeing and understanding and valuing. It turns them into academics who, if they want to succeed as academics, cease trying to address the public. They start writing and speaking and thinking and reading for the sake of one another. Faculty are a very inbred sort of culture as a consequence of that. Of course, the major loss is the society as a whole.